32 confirmed dead became 164, then climbed past 3,000 within days. 50,000 people are still listed as missing in northern Venezuela right now. Two massive earthquakes struck this region only 39 seconds apart from each other. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why those numbers kept climbing. Drop your city below if you've ever lived through a major earthquake yourself. On June 24th, 2026, the ground tore open in northern Venezuela twice. The first earthquake hit magnitude 7.1, quickly revised upward to 7.2. Just 39 seconds later, a second and even larger earthquake struck the same region. That second quake measured magnitude 7.5, nearly double the energy of the first. Scientists call this rare pattern an earthquake doublet, two major shocks almost back to back. The first rupture didn't release all the stress. It loaded the fault segment right beside it. That neighboring segment was already close to breaking, and the sudden jolt pushed it over. 39 seconds isn't enough time to run down a flight of stairs to safety. People still recovering from the first shock had no warning before the second one hit. The worst hit towns included Valencia, San Felipe, Moron, and the port of Puerto Cabello. Valencia sits roughly 37 miles from the epicenter. San Felipe only about 18. Puerto Cabello, a major port city, sits roughly 21 miles from where the fault broke. The first quake ruptured the Boconó fault, a major strike-slip system running through Venezuela. That rupture then triggered a second break on the neighboring San Sebastián fault. Both faults sit along the boundary where the Caribbean and South American plates grind past. Other major strands along this same boundary include the El Pilar and Caracas faults. Every one of those names represents a segment capable of producing its own major earthquake. That grinding motion moves less than an inch each year, which sounds impossibly slow. Both earthquakes struck shallow, only about 6 to 8 miles beneath the surface. Shallow. On-land earthquakes deliver their full violence straight up into the towns above. Venezuela's acting president declared a national state of emergency within hours of the quakes, even in Caracas, over 100 miles away. Two separate districts saw buildings collapse outright. Witnesses describe walls cracking and breaking open inside buildings as the shaking finally hit. A magnitude 7.5 quake out in the open ocean is simply a headline. That same earthquake underneath a city full of vulnerable buildings becomes an actual disaster. Compare that to 2018, when Venezuela's last major quake struck far offshore instead. That 2018 quake was actually larger, magnitude 7.3, yet caused limited damage. It happened deep underground and far from shore, so its energy weakened before arriving. This time, the physics flipped completely. Shallow, on land, and close to major cities. Shaking near the epicenter reached intensity 8 to 8.5 on the Mercalli scale. That intensity level is described as severe to violent, enough to collapse poorly built structures. The ground shook continuously for 2 to 3 full minutes, an extraordinarily long duration. It's actually the slower shear waves, not the faster initial jolt, that caused the damage. A tsunami advisory briefly went out for Puerto Rico and nearby Caribbean coastlines, too. That warning wasn't for a towering wave, just dangerous currents and small sea level shifts. Because this fault mostly grinds sideways, it barely displaced any water, and the advisory was canceled. The coastal town of La Guaira suffered the worst destruction of the entire disaster. Underneath La Guaira sits roughly 500 feet of loose, water-deposited sediment. That kind of soft ground behaves like a bowl of jelly during an earthquake. Shake that jelly back and forth, and the wobbling amplifies far beyond the original force. That same coastal area buried itself in catastrophic mudslides just decades before this earthquake. Back in 1999, days of heavy rain triggered massive debris flows there. That loose, unstable ground has now failed twice in one generation. Mud once, and shaking once. Caracas sits over 100 miles from the epicenter, yet buildings still came down there. The capital sits inside a narrow valley filled with its own soft sedimentary basin. That basin traps seismic energy and stretches out the duration of the shaking further. Worse, it amplifies exactly the frequencies that tall buildings naturally sway at anyway. Hard bedrock shrugs off a distant earthquake, Soft sediment rings like a struck bell. We know this because Caracas has done this exact thing before, decades earlier. In 1967, a much smaller quake collapsed high-rise towers in Los Palos Grandes. That earthquake only measured magnitude 6.6, yet it still killed roughly 240 people. This time. That exact same neighborhood was named among the worst hit again. The magnitude delivers the raw energy, but the city itself decides who actually dies. The same physical earthquake in a differently built city would kill only a fraction as many. This fault system has a long, brutal memory, stretching back more than 2 centuries. In 1812, an earthquake on this same boundary destroyed Caracas almost completely. That disaster killed an estimated 30,000 people, at a time of a far smaller population. It also severely damaged San Felipe, the very city named in this new disaster. In 1900, an offshore quake near magnitude 7.6 also struck this coast. In 1997, a magnitude 6.9 quake killed dozens on a nearby fault. The historical record shows this boundary has produced damaging earthquakes over 180 times. That's not a freak event. It's simply what this particular fault has always done. Those quakes span 4 centuries of continuous, quiet loading beneath northern Venezuela. Disaster planners had feared this exact scenario for decades, and the fault finally delivered it. Within minutes of the rupture, a model called PAGER made an alarming projection. PAGER isn't a body count. It's a statistical estimate built for magnitude, depth, and population. It compares this earthquake against how similar quakes have historically affected similar populations. The model gave roughly a 44% chance the toll would land between 10 and 100,000. It also gave a 30% chance the final toll would exceed 100,000 entirely. That's a model considering a 5-figure death toll the single most likely outcome. In the first hours, officials confirmed only 32 deaths and around 700 injuries. A day later, that confirmed number had already climbed past 160 people. Within days, confirmed deaths passed 3,000, with 50,000 people still unaccounted for. The United States Geological Survey ultimately estimated 30 to 50,000 total deaths. Dozens confirmed on the ground and tens of thousands feared by the model can both be true. That rising number was never the disaster getting worse. It was confirmation catching up. Every confirmed death has to be physically reached, recovered, and identified before it counts. Blocked roads, downed phone lines, and overwhelmed hospitals all slow that grim accounting down. None of this delay is a cover-up. It's simply the normal, grim shape of early disaster. Rescuers digging through rubble are simply too busy surviving to file official reports yet. Hospitals near the epicenter quickly became overwhelmed, treating the injured while the dead waited. For scale, a single collapsed condo tower in Florida once killed 98 people. Multiply that single tragedy by hundreds, and you start to grasp this disaster's true scale. Venezuela now has hundreds, possibly thousands, of buildings that failed in that exact same way. Drop a comment if your city sits near a fault line you didn't know about. Most of the deadliest collapses shared one specific structural failure pattern, called pancaking. In a pancake collapse, each floor drops straight down onto the floor below it. Engineers point to something called the P-delta effect as the likely culprit. When a building's columns shift sideways, gravity no longer pulls straight down through them. That sideways shift creates a twisting force the columns were never designed to handle. Under enough twisting, the columns simply snap and the whole floor gives way. Weak connections between floor slabs and columns make this exact failure even more likely. Engineers saw this same pattern in parking garages after California's 1994 Northridge earthquake. I happened to visit some of those damaged garages myself just days after that quake. That disaster taught the industry to reinforce shear walls specifically against this failure mode. 3 factors usually combine to cause this scale of earthquake destruction anywhere in the world. Poor materials, weak design methods, and unenforced building codes each play a role. Investigators will spend months determining exactly which of those 3 factors mattered most here. Venezuela didn't take earthquake-resistant building codes seriously until the mid-1980s. Modern codes there are actually fairly up to date, but older buildings predate them entirely. Structural steel generally performs better than reinforced concrete during severe earthquake shaking. Engineers now test scale models on massive shake tables in Japan and California. The largest shake table in the United States sits at a university in San Diego. Japan actually operates the largest shake table in the entire world for this exact purpose. Those tests simulate real ground acceleration, revealing exactly where buildings fail first. Researchers photograph every crack, then use that footage to redesign future column connections. Little by little, disasters like this one quietly rewrite construction standards around the world. The danger didn't end when the shaking finally stopped, not even close. Within the first hours, roughly 20 aftershocks had already been recorded across the region. Aftershock sequences after a magnitude 7.5 quake can rumble on for years. Scientists put the odds of a magnitude 6 or larger aftershock at around 40%. That aftershock risk is serious because it strikes buildings that are already cracked. Walls left standing but badly weakened can come down completely in the very next jolt. The most dangerous moment for many survivors is returning inside a damaged home too soon. Slopes loosened by the main shock can also fail during the region's frequent heavy rain. The fault system runs roughly 800 miles across the entire top of Venezuela. Y'all, this fault just proved it's capable of breaking multiple segments in one sequence. This doublet released stress on one stretch while loading the segments sitting right beside it. Whether those neighboring segments, some closer to Caracas, are now closer to failing remains unclear. The same week this happened, several other major earthquakes struck completely different parts of Earth. A magnitude 6.9 hit the Japan Trench, and a 5.6 struck California. A large sunspot region also rotated into view, facing Earth around that same time. Predictably, claims spread online that all these events were somehow secretly connected. The actual data simply doesn't support any of those global conspiracy-style theories. Genuine remote earthquake triggering is real, but it requires an enormous, already primed nearby fault. Big earthquakes genuinely do send seismic waves rippling all the way around the planet. But those distant ripples arrive far too weak to actually rupture another major fault. It produces tiny local tremors, never a full magnitude 7 rupture an ocean away. A solar flare simply doesn't carry anywhere near enough energy to move a fault. Earth actually averages more than a dozen magnitude 7 earthquakes every single year. Several large quakes landing in 1 week is simply ordinary planetary arithmetic, nothing more. Venezuela's doublet had one clear, boring explanation: a fault boundary finally letting go. Search and rescue crews worked around the clock, racing daylight and blocked roads both. The closure of the main international airport slowed the arrival of outside aid significantly. That closure meant heavy rescue equipment and medical teams arrived far slower than needed. In a disaster this size, simply getting help into the country becomes part of the crisis. International teams from the United States, China, Brazil, and Mexico eventually mobilized to help. As days passed, the focus quietly shifted from rescue efforts toward long-term recovery. That shift doesn't mean anyone gave up. It simply reflects the grim math of survival odds. Engineers studying the wreckage will spend years figuring out exactly which buildings failed and why. Those lessons rarely stay local. They tend to reshape building codes worldwide eventually. One video covering this disaster was filmed the day after, another filmed 9 days later. Between those two moments, the confirmed toll multiplied nearly 20 times over. That gap alone tells you how slowly the true scale of a disaster like this surfaces. This fault didn't go away after 1812. It simply kept quietly loading since. 2 centuries later, the same boundary broke again, almost exactly where it broke before. The plates grinding beneath Venezuela don't care that a capital city sits on top. They will keep moving at their own pace, whether anyone happens to be watching or not. Tell us which part of this story surprised you most, the science or the numbers? If this helped you understand what actually happened, share it with someone today. We read every comment. So tell us which earthquake story you want covered next. We'll keep tracking this story as recovery continues in the months ahead. The real lesson here was never just about magnitude. It was about what magnitude meets.